The story of banking begins in a place you would never expect. For centuries, we have credited the merchants of Renaissance Italy with inventing modern finance. But what if that story is incomplete, missing its very first chapter? This investigation uncovers a forgotten world of loans, contracts, and credit that operated with stunning sophistication over 3,000 years before the Medici family ever walked the streets of Florence. You will see how the core logic of our entire global financial system was first written not on paper, but in wet clay. The evidence lies in tens of thousands of Babylonian tablets, unearthed from the dust, that record not myths or laws, but the meticulous details of everyday economic life. These ledgers reveal a financial landscape so advanced and familiar it forces us to rewrite history. How did such a complex system arise, and why was it erased from our collective memory for so long? What does it say about us that the impulses of finance are truly ancient? These silent witnesses to history did not come to light in a single, dramatic excavation. Instead, they emerged slowly from the earth over more than a century, their true story obscured by the very dust that preserved them. When archaeologists first began digging into the great mounds of Mesopotamia in the 1800s, their eyes were fixed on grander prizes. They sought the palaces of legendary kings, the statues of gods, the epic tales of heroes like Gilgamesh inscribed on monumental slabs. In the ruins of vast temple complexes and administrative buildings, they would uncover rooms filled, floor to ceiling, with what looked like mundane debris. These were the tablets, tens of thousands of them, often stored in organized archives, yet to the early explorers, they appeared to be little more than bureaucratic paperwork, inventory lists of grain, records of sheep, rosters of workers. They were catalogued, boxed, and shipped off to museum basements around the world, curiosities for specialists but not seen as history-changing texts. The sheer scale was staggering, yet the meaning was locked away, waiting for a key. That key was a fundamental shift in perspective. It required looking past the kings and the conquests to see the vibrant, humming engine of everyday life. It meant understanding that a simple list of barley deliveries was not just a tally, it was a contract. A record of a silver transfer was not just an entry, it was a legally binding loan. These pieces of clay were not administrative trivia, they were the foundational instruments of a complex economic world. To decipher them was to learn the language of a civilization that ran on credit. The true nature of these tablets remained hidden in plain sight for decades, not because they were unreadable, but because we were reading them with the wrong expectations. Each one is inscribed with the intricate wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, pressed into damp clay with a reed stylus. The language is Akkadian, the diplomatic and administrative tongue of ancient Mesopotamia. Translating the words was one thing, but unlocking their financial meaning was an entirely different puzzle. It was like finding a modern stock portfolio written entirely in complex legal jargon and unfamiliar shorthand. You could read every word but still miss the billion-dollar transactions they described. The breakthrough came when scholars stopped looking for epic poetry and started looking for balance sheets. They realized they needed to become accountants in a 3,000-year-old firm. Epigraphers and economic historians began the painstaking work of cross-referencing thousands of these mundane records, searching for patterns. They pieced together the specialized vocabulary of Babylonian commerce. A simple term for silver was not just a metal, it was the standard unit of value like today's dollar. They deciphered symbols for interest, which was calculated with remarkable consistency, often at 20% annually. They found explicit terms for collateral, the property pledged to secure a loan, which could be anything from a house to a future harvest. Words for debt and credit emerged, along with intricate clauses for partnership agreements and rental contracts. This was not cryptic symbolism, it was explicit, detailed financial documentation. The ledgers recorded names, dates, amounts, interest rates, repayment schedules, and witnesses, every element of a binding agreement. This precision is what allows us to hear, with startling clarity, the conversations of an ancient marketplace. We are not interpreting vague hints, we are reading the original terms of the deal, written the day it was made. This linguistic deciphering turned anonymous clay lumps into a resonant archive of human ambition and trust, revealing that the people of Babylon did not just use money, they built a world upon promises written in clay. But who was running this sophisticated system of loans and credit? The answer lies at the very heart of Babylonian society, in an institution that was far more than a place of worship. The temple was the first true bank. In cities like or Nippur, the temple complex was not a quiet sanctuary. It was a sprawling, bustling economic powerhouse. It owned vast tracts of the most fertile land, managed enormous herds of livestock, and stored immense stockpiles of grain, wool, and precious metals. It was the largest employer, the biggest landlord, and the central warehouse for the entire community's wealth. This made it the only entity with both the resources and the long-term stability to act as a financial anchor. Think of the temple as a combination of a modern central bank, a major agricultural cooperative, and a trusted notary public, all operating under divine authority. Its primary financial role was as a lender. When a farmer faced a lean season or needed seed for the next planting, he did not go to a street corner money changer. He went to the temple. The ledgers show this in stunning detail. One typical record might state that the temple of Shamash advanced 10 gur of barley to a farmer named Elishu Ibni, to be repaid after the harvest with an additional 2 gur as interest. This was not a gift, it was a formal loan documented on clay and witnessed by temple officials. The same system worked for merchants. A trader planning a risky venture down the Euphrates River could receive a loan of silver from the temple treasury to purchase goods, with the promise of repayment upon his safe return. The temple assumed the risk, and in return, it earned a steady flow of interest payments that further swelled its stores. Crucially, the temple also acted as the ultimate guarantor. Its authority, backed by the gods and the state, gave these clay contracts their binding power. A deal witnessed and recorded by the temple scribes carried immense weight. This created something revolutionary: trust in a promise. A farmer could plant seeds borrowed today, confident that the terms of repayment were fixed and enforceable. A merchant could travel for months, knowing the silver waiting for him at home was secured by an institution that would outlive any individual. This institutional framework provided the stability without which credit cannot exist. It transformed simple barter and temporary favors into a formal, predictable financial system. The temple's walls did not just house statues of deities, they safeguarded the very concept of future obligation, allowing the Babylonian economy to grow far beyond what simple exchange could ever allow. Yet this system of credit needed a stable foundation, a common language of value that everyone could understand. That language was silver. In Babylon, money was not a coin with a king's face stamped upon it. That innovation would not arrive for over a millennium. Instead, their entire economy ran on weighed silver. A shekel was not a coin. It was a precise unit of weight, roughly equivalent to 8 grams. You would carry your wealth not in a pocket of jangling coins, but as broken pieces of silver jewelry, worn-out vessels, or small ingots, their value determined solely by their weight on a scale. This simple concept of standardized weight created something revolutionary, a universal measuring stick for worth. It meant that anything could be priced in silver shekels. The ledgers make this astonishingly clear. They record the cost of a modest house at 7 shekels of silver. The monthly rent for a simple dwelling might be 1 shekel. A day's wage for a skilled craftsman could be measured in fractions of a shekel. Even commodities like barley, which were physically traded in massive volumes, had their prices consistently quoted in this silver standard. A trader did not have to barter 5 goats for a bolt of cloth and hope the other person wanted goats. He could sell his goats for a mutually agreed weight of silver, then use that silver to buy cloth or land or to pay a debt. Silver became the invisible thread connecting every transaction in society. This separated value from the object itself. A shekel of silver was worth the same whether it was in the form of a ring, a scrap, or a dusting at the bottom of a pouch. It was durable, easily divisible, and widely accepted, fulfilling all the classic roles of true money. It was a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. You could earn silver through labor, save it for years under your floorboards, and know it would still be accepted to buy a field for your family's future. This abstraction is crucial. It shows the Babylonians had moved far beyond simple barter into a conceptual financial space. Their ledgers are not just lists of stuff, they are balance sheets where everything is translated into this common financial language. When a temple recorded a loan of 30 shekels to a merchant, it was not lending 30 specific pieces of metal. It was creating a financial obligation measured in this universal unit. The clay tablet itself became the proof of that abstract value, a permanent record of a promise that existed independently of any physical pile of silver. In this way, the humble shekel weight became the ghost in the machine, the invisible standard that allowed a complex economy of promises to flourish across the desert and for centuries. This universal language of silver value gave rise to the single most powerful financial instrument ever conceived, the formal loan contract. Etched into the clay of Babylon, we find not just promises, but the complete legal architecture of debt. A typical tablet from the city of Sippar tells a story in a few precise lines. It begins with a date anchoring the agreement in a specific moment of history. Then it names the parties, clearly stating who is giving and who is receiving. It records the principal amount, perhaps 5 shekels of refined silver. Next comes the critical term, the interest, often stated as 1 shekel per mina per year, which translates to that consistent 20% annual rate. The repayment date is specified, typically linked to the next harvest or a fixed number of months away. Finally, the document lists the names of witnesses, respectable members of the community who observed the transaction and could attest to its terms. Some contracts were even sealed with the personal cylinder seal of the debtor, pressed into the clay like a signature, making the tablet itself a unique and legally binding object. This was not a casual IOU. It was a sophisticated financial tool that created a clear, enforceable obligation stretching into the future. The contract transformed a simple transfer of resources into a structured relationship with rules, timelines, and consequences. It protected both sides. The lender had a documented claim to repayment with interest, a tangible asset they could even sell to someone else. The borrower, in turn, had proof of the exact terms, a shield against a lender who might later demand more. This legal framework is what allowed credit to flow safely. A merchant could take silver from a temple or a wealthy individual, embark on a long trading journey, and all parties could sleep at night knowing the agreement was fixed in clay, not just memory. The contract made the future predictable. It turned time itself into a commodity that could be bought and sold, for the interest was essentially the price of using someone else's resources for a period. In these dense blocks of cuneiform, we see the birth of financial time, the moment humanity learned to formally negotiate with tomorrow. These contracts carried a price, and that price was remarkably consistent. Across centuries of Babylonian ledgers, a clear pattern emerges for loans of silver. The interest rate was almost always 20% per year. For loans of barley or other commodities, the rate was typically 1/3 or 33.3%. This was not a coincidence or a matter of random bargaining. These were standard, expected rates, as familiar to a Babylonian merchant as a modern mortgage rate is to a home buyer. The difference in rates reveals a deep understanding of risk and practicality. Silver was durable, stable, and easy to store. Lending silver carried a relatively predictable risk, primarily the possibility the borrower might not return. Barley, however, was a different story. It could spoil, be eaten by pests, or be ruined by damp storage. A lender advancing a bushel of barley was taking on a much greater physical risk, and the higher interest rate reflected that. It was an early, sophisticated form of risk assessment, priced directly into the cost of credit. But who set these rates, and what stopped lenders from simply demanding whatever they could get? The answer lies not just in custom, but in the power of the state. We find some of the world's earliest known financial regulations inscribed on a towering black stone monument. The Code of Hammurabi, created by the famous Babylonian king around 1750 BCE, is far more than a list of harsh punishments. Embedded within its 282 laws are explicit economic decrees. One law caps the interest on a loan of silver at 20% and on a loan of grain at 33.3%, effectively codifying the existing market standards into royal law. A lender who charged more than this had his entire loan forfeited, a powerful deterrent. This reveals a profound early realization that unregulated credit could tear the social fabric apart. The king understood that if debt spiraled out of control, it could impoverish entire families, force them into servitude, and destabilize the kingdom itself. Perhaps even more astonishing than these rate caps are the occasional royal decrees known as Misharam Acts or debt amnesties. In times of economic hardship, often at the beginning of a new king's reign, a proclamation would be issued across the land. These edicts declared a clean slate, wiping away certain types of consumer debt and even freeing those who had been forced into servitude to pay off what they owed. Imagine a national announcement that all credit card debt and medical bills were suddenly forgiven. These were not acts of mere charity, they were calculated economic resets. They acknowledged that debt, while essential for economic activity, could become a destructive burden if left to grow unchecked forever. The system needed a pressure valve, and the king provided it. This shows a level of economic thinking we rarely attribute to the ancient world. It was an understanding that finance existed to serve society, not the other way around, and that sometimes the market needed a deliberate, compassionate correction to preserve stability for everyone. The ledgers, in their silent way, record these moments too, with tablets showing debts marked as cleared or obligations suddenly ending, not from repayment but from royal decree. In these acts, we see the first glimmers of a social contract woven directly into the financial system, a recognition that the power of credit must be balanced with the need for collective survival. But a promise of future payment is only as strong as the guarantee behind it. The Babylonians understood this fundamental truth of finance better than anyone, and their ledgers reveal a sophisticated system for managing risk that feels startlingly modern. At the heart of every loan was the concept of collateral, something of value pledged by the borrower to secure the debt. If the borrower could not repay, the lender had a legal claim to that pledged item. The range of acceptable collateral recorded in the tablets paints a vivid picture of their society's assets. The most common pledges were productive property, like a parcel of agricultural land or a house in the city. These were stable, tangible assets whose value was clear to everyone, but collateral could also be more personal. Ledgers document loans secured by enslaved individuals who are considered legal property, or even by the borrower's own family members. In such agreements, if the debt went unpaid, those pledged individuals could be required to enter the creditor's household to work off the obligation. This practice, deeply unsettling from our modern perspective, underscores how comprehensively every form of value, including human labor and liberty, was integrated into their financial framework. The process was formal and precise. A contract would explicitly name the collateral, describing the field by its location next to a neighbor's plot or the enslaved person by name and distinguishing features. The tablet itself served as the title deed, transferring ownership of that collateral to the creditor for the duration of the loan. Upon full repayment, the contract would be physically broken, nullifying the claim. If the borrower defaulted, the creditor simply kept the tablet, which now served as legal proof of their new ownership over the pledged land, person, or goods. This system provided crucial security, enabling lenders to extend credit with greater confidence, which in turn made more capital available for the entire economy. Yet the Babylonians did not stop there. They developed an even more nuanced instrument that demonstrated remarkable financial creativity, called the antikrisis. In this arrangement, the collateral was not just held in reserve, it was put to immediate use. A classic example involved a farmer in need of silver. He could pledge his date palm orchard to a creditor as security for a loan, but instead of letting the orchard sit idle, the contract allowed the creditor to harvest and sell the dates from that very orchard for the life of the loan. The proceeds from those dates would then count toward paying down the interest, or sometimes even the principal, of the debt itself. This was a brilliantly efficient mechanism. It provided the borrower with the silver he needed, while ensuring the creditor received a steady stream of value from the collateral without having to seize and manage it outright. The asset continued to produce, offsetting the cost of the loan in real time. This is not primitive barter, it is a highly advanced form of secured finance, showing a deep understanding of cash flow and asset productivity. It reveals a world where financial agreements were designed not just to punish failure, but to create mutually beneficial structures that kept economic energy flowing. Through these clay records, we see a civilization that had moved far beyond simple loans into the realm of structured risk management, building a resilient system where trust was carefully and sometimes harshly engineered. This web of local loans and secured contracts formed the sturdy roots of the system, but its true power was revealed when it stretched across the horizon. The financial ingenuity of Babylon did not stop at the city walls. It fueled vast, daring expeditions that connected distant worlds. At the center of this long-distance trade stood the Tamkaram, a figure far more complex than a simple merchant. He was a financier, an importer, a venture capitalist, and a risk manager all in one. His operations, meticulously recorded on clay, show us a globalizing economy in its earliest form. These merchants did not simply load donkeys with goods and hope for the best. They built sophisticated credit networks that reached from the Persian Gulf up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, across the desert to Assyria, and westward to the ports of the Levant. The ledgers reveal the engine of this trade, formal partnership agreements that separated capital from labor and spread risk among many. A typical contract might record that a wealthy investor, or a group of them, provided a Tamkaram with a substantial amount of silver, say 20 minas, which was a small fortune. This was not a loan with fixed interest, but an investment in a shared venture. The merchant agent would use this silver as working capital to purchase goods in Babylon, perhaps fine textiles or tin, then organize a caravan for the perilous months-long journey to a city like Ashur in the north. There he would sell the Babylonian goods for a profit, use the proceeds to buy local specialties like Anatolian silver or prized Lebanese timber, and trek all the way back home. Only upon his safe return would the accounts be settled. The original silver investment was returned to the backers, and the total profit from the venture was carefully calculated and then split according to a pre-agreed ratio, often 50-50 between the investor and the traveling agent. This structure is breathtakingly modern. It allowed individuals with capital but no desire to face desert bandits or stormy seas to participate in lucrative foreign trade. It provided the traveling agent with the funds he needed without burdening him with a crushing debt that demanded repayment regardless of the journey's outcome. Their fates were literally tied together by the terms on the tablet. If the caravan succeeded, both prospered. If it was lost, both shared the loss. This was the ancient equivalent of a joint stock company, using credit not for consumption but to fund ambitious enterprise. The clay records even show commissions for specific agents, instructing them to use the funds to acquire particular commodities, proving this was deliberate, targeted investing. Through these fragile tablets, we hear the quiet agreements that made the ancient world feel smaller, turning the vast and dangerous spaces between cities into calculated corridors of commerce, all powered by promises inscribed in mud before the journey even began. The true power of this financial system is best understood not through temples or kings, but through one extraordinary family whose story has survived the ages. Buried within the clay archives of Babylon lies the complete business record of the Egibi family, a dynasty of financiers who operated for more than 5 generations, from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II well into the Persian Empire. Their archive, comprising thousands of meticulously preserved tablets, does not tell of epic battles or royal decrees. Instead, it chronicles the rise of a private banking empire built entirely on the principles of credit, contract, and cunning calculation. Through their ledgers, the abstract systems of loans and collateral come vibrantly to life as a personal, multi-generational saga of ambition and strategy. The Egibi were not just money lenders, they were entrepreneurs who mastered every facet of the Babylonian economy. Their tablets record a staggering array of transactions. There are straightforward silver loans to farmers and merchants, complete with interest rates and collateral clauses. But there are also complex real estate deals where they bought, sold, and rented out urban properties and fertile date palm orchards, building a substantial portfolio of income-generating assets. We see marriage contracts and detailed inheritance documents, as the family carefully planned the transfer of its wealth from one generation to the next, ensuring the financial dynasty would outlive its founders. Some of the most revealing tablets involve litigation, recording disputes over boundaries, unpaid debts, or partnership disagreements, showing how actively they use the courts to protect their interests. One typical document might show the head of the family, perhaps a man named Iti Marduk Balatu, advancing a significant loan of silver to a high-ranking temple official, using the official's future income from temple services as collateral. Another shows the family acquiring a large, distressed estate from a noble family that had fallen on hard times, a savvy purchase of valuable land at a favorable price. Through these countless everyday deals, a portrait emerges of a family that acted as a central node in the economic web of Babylon. They provided liquidity when others needed it, managed risk through diversification, and reinvested their profits to compound their influence. Their archive is a masterclass in financial literacy, written in clay. It proves that the tools of banking were not locked within temple walls, but had diffused into the hands of private individuals who used them to build lasting legacies. The Egibi family's century-long story turns our understanding of ancient finance from a cold system into a warm, human drama of perseverance and acumen. Their ledgers reveal a business empire of astonishing breadth. The Egibi family did not specialize, they diversified, mastering every available avenue for profit in a complex economy. At their core, they were lenders extending silver and barley loans to a wide clientele. But unlike a temple which lent from its vast stored wealth, the Egibi operated more like a modern investment bank, using capital from their own reserves and likely from wealthy partners to fund their ventures. Their loan contracts show meticulous detail, always specifying the interest, the repayment date, and the collateral, which could be a house, a field, or even the borrower's future harvest. This was not charity, it was calculated finance, and it generated a steady, predictable income stream that fueled their other ambitions. their most visible footprint was in real estate. The tablets document them repeatedly buying, selling, and leasing urban properties in the bustling heart of Babylon. They were not just speculators flipping houses, they were building a rental portfolio. One typical record shows them purchasing a dwelling from a family, then immediately leasing it back to them or to a new tenant for a monthly payment of silver. This transformed a lump sum of capital into a recurring revenue source, a classic strategy for wealth preservation and growth. They did the same with agricultural land, acquiring large date palm orchards and fertile fields on the city's outskirts. These estates were not worked by the family directly. Instead, they were managed through leases or sharecropping agreements. A farmer would work the Egibi's land in exchange for giving a significant portion of the harvest, often 1/3 to 1/2, to the family as rent. This made the Egibi absentee landlords, their wealth growing from the labor of others, secured by the legal force of their clay contracts. Beyond lending and land, they engaged in large-scale commodity trading. Their agents bought staples like barley, dates, and wool in bulk, either for resale in the city markets or for use in their own diverse enterprises. This vertical integration was key. They might finance a farmer's planting with a loan of seed, secured by the future crop, then later purchase that very harvest at a favorable price, process it, and sell it for a profit. They controlled the value chain from credit to final sale. Their most prestigious role, however, was as financial intermediaries for the elite and even the royal court. The ledgers show them managing the fortunes of temple officials and high-ranking military officers, handling the collection of their income from lands and duties, and making sophisticated payments on their behalf. They provided discreet financial services to a clientele that needed more flexibility than the temple bureaucracy could offer. In one fascinating case, they were entrusted with managing the complex inheritance of a prominent family, distributing assets to heirs and resolving disputes, a role that required immense trust and financial acumen. The scale is what truly stuns. Over 5 generations, the Egibi archive references thousands of transactions, involving hundreds of distinct individuals and properties across the region. They maintain detailed account books tracking debits and credits for dozens of clients simultaneously, a system of accounting that would feel familiar to any modern bookkeeper. This was not a side operation. It was a fully realized private sector financial institution operating in parallel to the temple banks. It proves that the core concepts of banking, credit, investment, and asset management had fully escaped their religious origins and were now tools for ambitious families to carve out their own economic dynasties. The clay tablets of the Egibi are not just dry business records. They are the balance sheets of a civilization where money had learned to work relentlessly and intelligently for those who understood its language. Yet this brilliant engine of credit and commerce had a relentless, often brutal underside. For every family like the Egibi who thrived on calculated risk, countless ordinary farmers lived on its knife edge. The same clay tablets that recorded prosperous partnerships and lucrative leases also hold the quiet tragedies of a system pushed to its limit. A typical entry might simply note that a man named Curry, unable to repay a loan of barley after a poor harvest, had entered the household of his creditor with his entire family to work off the obligation. With that single line, a free citizen became a debt servant, his labor now the property of another until the balance was cleared. This was not a rare occurrence, but a chronic feature of the economy. When the rains failed or locusts swept the fields, a subsistence farmer with a loan coming due faced an impossible choice. He could forfeit the land he had pledged as collateral, leaving his family destitute, or he could pledge the only asset he had left, the labor of himself and his kin. The ledgers show this transition with chilling matter-of-factness, recording people as entries alongside sacks of grain and parcels of land, their freedom quantified in silver shekels. This created a slow-burning social crisis. As debt mounted across the countryside, more and more families fell into servitude, concentrating wealth and power in the hands of the creditor class and stripping the kingdom of its free laborers and soldiers. The very contracts that enabled economic growth also woven strands of resentment and instability into the fabric of society. The tension between financial innovation and human cost became a constant hum beneath the civilization's achievements. It is here that we see the true purpose of those royal debt cancellations, the Misharram Acts. When a new king ascended the throne, his proclamation of a clean slate was not merely an act of benevolence, it was a profound political and economic reset. By wiping away consumer debt and freeing those bound by it, the king was not attacking the financial system but saving it from itself. He was releasing the social pressure valve, restoring a population of debt servants to citizenship, and returning mortgaged land to its original families. This rebooted the economic cycle, allowing communities to plant and trade again from a stable foundation. These decrees recognized a fundamental truth the Babylonians understood intuitively, that a society choked by debt cannot function, and that the long-term stability of the state was more important than any individual creditor's ledger. The financial system and the social order were not separate realms. They were deeply intertwined, each holding the power to sustain or unravel the other. The clay tablets, in their unflinching detail, bear witness to both the engine and its occasional, necessary emergency brake. Perhaps the most surprising names found in these financial ledgers belong to women. The bustling markets and solemn temple archives of Babylon were not an exclusively male domain. To assume so would be to miss a vital layer of economic reality preserved in the clay. While society was certainly patriarchal, with men holding primary legal and political authority, the financial system possessed a remarkable degree of flexibility. Women, especially those from elite or propertied families, operated with significant economic agency, engaging in transactions that reveal a world more nuanced than we might expect. The tablets do not shout this fact, they simply record it as everyday business. We find contracts where a woman named Amat Shamash, daughter of a prominent merchant, acts as a creditor. She lends a quantity of silver to a male business associate, with the standard interest and collateral clauses, her seal pressed firmly into the document as the grantor of the loan. In another ledger, a widow named Beltoni appears as the manager of her late husband's substantial date palm orchards. She is not a passive holder of inheritance, she is an active administrator, leasing out parcels of land, collecting rents in silver and barley, and issuing loans of seed to the farmers who worked her estates. Her name appears on dozens of tablets over many years, a clear indication of sustained, recognized financial control. These women could own property outright, inherited from fathers or husbands, and that property gave them a foundation for economic activity. They could sue and be sued in financial matters. Their legal personhood in contractual disputes was acknowledged by the courts. A fascinating case involves a woman named Aristiaya, who brought a claim against a business partner for failing to deliver the full profit share from a joint textile venture. The court heard her case based on the written partnership agreement, judging the matter on the contractual terms, not the gender of the parties. This practical, document-driven approach allowed women of means to participate within the system's rules. They most commonly appear as creditors within family and local community networks, lending smaller sums to relatives or neighbors, which suggests they played a key role in providing localized liquidity and managing household investment portfolios. Their participation corrects a flat historical picture. It shows that the machinery of Babylonian finance, for all its complexity, had interlocking gears that could be turned by different hands. Economic agency was not a monolithic privilege. It flowed along channels of wealth and social standing, enabling a select but significant group of women to write their own lines into the enduring ledger of commerce. This meticulous documentation was not a chaotic pile of notes. It was a structured system of accountability. The Babylonian scribes developed bookkeeping methods so logical and precise they form a direct, unbroken lineage to the accounting practices used by every major corporation and bank today. When you look closely at these tablets, you begin to see patterns that transcend language, a universal grammar of numbers and obligations. They did not simply jot down transactions as they occurred, they organized them into balanced accounts. A single tablet might be dedicated to one individual or one specific business venture, listing every interaction across an entire year. On the left side of the tablet, the scribe would itemize all the debits, everything that was owed to the account holder, like payments from tenants or returns from a trading partner. On the right side, he would list all the credits, the obligations going out, such as wages paid, taxes delivered to the temple, or silver loaned to another merchant. The goal was for the two sides to balance, a clear visual and numerical representation of a closed financial loop. This is the ancient precursor to the modern T account, the fundamental building block of double-entry bookkeeping that would not be formally described in Europe for another 3,000 years. The ledgers show they were already thinking in these terms, conceptually separating inflows and outflows to understand true financial position. Beyond individual accounts, they produced annual summaries. At the end of a harvest cycle or a fiscal year, a master scribe would compile the activity from dozens of smaller tablets into a consolidated report. This document would show the total grain received by the temple, the total silver loaned out, the total interest collected, and the net change in the institution's wealth. It was a snapshot of economic health, allowing administrators to make informed decisions about future loans, investments, and resource allocation. The system's sophistication is most evident in the existence of audit trails. Scholars have found multiple copies of the same contract, each held by a different party involved in the deal. The creditor kept one, the debtor kept another, and often a third was deposited in a temple archive as a neutral public record. This created a built-in verification system. If a dispute arose, the parties could compare their copies or summon the temple's version to settle the matter. Some tablets are explicitly labeled as copies, with phrases meaning duplicate or second tablet, proving an intentional practice of record replication for security. We even find correction tablets where an error in an earlier ledger was noted and formally amended with a new, corrected document, showing a commitment to accuracy over time. This was not casual note-taking, it was a rigorous, systematic approach to creating a trustworthy financial reality. The clay itself was the database, and the consistent formatting was the software. It allowed a complex society to track promises across vast distances and over many years, to resolve conflicts with evidence, and to plan for the future with data. In the ordered columns of cuneiform numbers, we see the birth of financial transparency, the moment humanity realized that for trust to scale, memory must be made material, systematic, and open to verification. So what do we call this intricate web of loans, accounts, and long-distance credit? It operated with stunning precision, yet you would have walked the streets of Babylon and never seen a sign for a bank. This is the profound paradox at the heart of their system. Babylon had all the essential functions of banking, but not the dedicated institutions we recognize today. The core activities that define a bank were alive and well, just distributed across the entire society, woven into the fabric of daily life. Think of it as banking without the bank building. The first function is deposit-taking, the safekeeping of assets. In Babylon, you did not open a savings account. Instead, you might deposit your surplus silver or grain with the local temple for safekeeping. Its fortified storerooms were the closest thing to a vault, and its divine authority offered a powerful deterrent against theft. Wealthy families like the Egibi also acted as de facto depositories, holding and managing assets for elite clients. The second function is lending, the heart of the system. This was not centralized. Temples lent from their vast reserves, merchant houses provided trade capital through partnerships, and private financiers issued loans from their personal wealth. Credit flowed from multiple competing sources, creating a vibrant, if informal, lending market. The third function is money changing and valuation. While silver was the standard, you still needed experts to assess the purity of a scrap of metal or to weigh it accurately on certified scales. Temple officials and reputable merchants performed this role, their reputation guaranteeing a fair measurement, effectively setting the exchange rate between raw silver and its purchasing power. The fourth, and perhaps most advanced function, is the transfer of funds without moving physical metal. The ledgers show this happening through book transfers. If two individuals both had accounts or ongoing dealings with the same temple or merchant house, a debt could be settled by simply having the scribe adjust the clay tablet. A notation would move value from one person's column to another's, clearing the obligation without a single shekel changing hands. This is the essence of modern banking, creating money as a ledger entry. All these pieces existed, but they were performed by different actors for different reasons. The temple banked to sustain its divine estate and exert social control. The merchant house banked to finance trade and earn profit. The private family banked to build a multi-generational dynasty. There was no single business model called banking, yet the society collectively performed all its vital tasks. This distributed system was its great strength and its ultimate vulnerability. It was flexible and responsive, emerging organically from need, but it lacked the unified regulation and concentrated capital that would later allow dedicated banks to scale and stabilize entire economies. The Babylonians had invented the engine of finance, but they left it running in separate, powerful modules across the civilization, not yet housed under one roof. The genius was not in a blueprint, but in a realization that trust, recorded in a permanent form, could itself become the most valuable currency of all. This system of distributed finance was not the only path forward. Centuries later, in the bustling agora of classical Athens, money lending took a very different shape. Here, banking was intensely personal, often conducted on a simple table, a trapeza, which gave the moneylenders their name, trapezites. Unlike the meticulous temple archives of Babylon, most Athenian deals were verbal agreements or simple written notes. The records were ephemeral, often just a mark on a wax tablet that could be smoothed away. This was finance built on personal reputation and the tight-knit bonds of the city-state, not on a vast, permanent ledger of clay. While it could be agile and responsive, it was also fragile, its history largely lost to time because it was never systematically inscribed for the ages. The Athenian system excelled at facilitating commerce within a small, face-to-face society, but it lacked the Babylonian drive for creating an unbreakable, auditable record of every obligation. It was a conversation where Babylonian finance was a contract. Then, leap forward 2,000 years to the merchant republics of Renaissance Italy. Here, in cities like Florence and Venice, we finally see the dedicated institution we recognize as a bank emerge, with teller windows, vaulted ceilings, and formal charters. The great innovation of this era was the perfection of double-entry bookkeeping, where every debit has a corresponding credit, creating a beautifully balanced system of accounts. This was a monumental leap in clarity and control, allowing merchants to track complex, global ventures with precision. Yet, when you examine its core principles, the ghost of Babylon is unmistakable. The Italian bankers were not inventing finance from nothing. They were refining a very old prototype, the concept of interest-bearing loans, the use of collateral to secure debt, the partnership agreements to fund risky overseas trade, even the very idea of a written contract as the soul of a transaction. All these were already mature practices in the time of Hammurabi. What the Italians did was architect a dedicated house for these activities, centralizing and professionalizing them under one roof. they gave the Babylonian engine a new, more powerful chassis. The lineage is clear, not of direct copying, but of a foundational logic rediscovered and rebuilt. Babylon provided the alphabet of finance, the basic characters of credit, debt, and contract. Classical Athens showed how that alphabet could be used for quick, poetic speech, and Renaissance Italy used it to write the formal, enduring constitutions of modern capitalism. Each built upon an ancient understanding that trust, when made tangible and transferable, could move the world. Yet this vast financial library, this intricate system that powered an empire for centuries, vanished from our collective memory. The ledgers did not crumble to dust, but the story they told was buried, waiting for a language we had forgotten how to speak. Their disappearance from history is a mystery with several compelling layers, a perfect storm of material fragility, cultural upheaval, and historical oversight. The first and most straightforward reason is the physical collapse of the civilization that created them. The great empires of Mesopotamia, from Babylon to Assyria, eventually fell to conquest by foreign powers, most notably the Persian Empire and later the forces of Alexander the Great. While these new rulers often adopted and continued using the existing administrative systems for a time, the center of economic and political gravity gradually shifted. The ancient institutions, the temples and the scribble schools that had been the guardians of this financial knowledge, lost their influence and funding. As these pillars eroded, the living tradition of maintaining and understanding the cuneiform ledgers began to fade. The knowledge of how to read and write the complex script became confined to an ever-shrinking circle of priests and scholars, until one day, the last scribe who could fully interpret a loan contract from the reign of Hammurabi passed away, and the language of finance fell silent. The second layer is a dramatic shift in the technology of record-keeping itself. The Babylonians wrote on clay because it was abundant and permanent, but it was also heavy and cumbersome. As empires grew larger and more interconnected, new materials offered greater convenience. Aramaic, written with ink on lightweight parchment or papyrus scrolls, became the new lingua franca of administration across the Near East. Imagine the shift from storing rooms full of heavy clay tablets to filing lightweight scrolls in a cabinet. The old system was not destroyed. It was simply abandoned as obsolete. The fragile papyrus records of later eras, however, had a fatal flaw. Clay did not; they decayed. Thousands of Aramaic financial documents from the successors to Babylon have been lost forever to damp, fire, or simple disintegration, creating a gap in the historical record. The clay tablets, ironically, survived precisely because they were forgotten in the rubble, baked hard by the sun and protected by the very earth that buried the cities. The third, and perhaps most significant, reason is a profound bias in the storytelling of history itself. When European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries began constructing the narrative of Western civilization, they traced a direct line from the philosophical and political achievements of Greece and Rome to their own Enlightenment ideals. Economics, they believed, was a modern science born in the coffeehouses of London and the trading ports of Venice. The ancient world was seen as a place of myth, epic poetry, and simple barter, not high finance. The few classical Greek authors who mentioned Mesopotamia often did so with a sense of distant curiosity, not as students of its economic models. This Eurocentric lens simply could not recognize the sophistication in those strange clay lumps covered in chicken scratch writing. The ledgers were physically present in museum collections, but they were categorized as curiosities, not as the seminal texts of economic history. The story of banking was written to start with the Medici, because that was the history the writers knew and valued. The Babylonian system was not erased, it was overlooked, waiting for a generation of historians who would look at a tablet and see not just a list of numbers, but the ghost of a global market, a testament to a forgotten financial revolution that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The story of Babylonian finance might have remained buried forever if not for a quiet revolution in a scholar's study. For decades after their excavation, the thousands of clay tablets sat in museum basements in London, Paris, and Berlin, labeled as administrative records and largely ignored. The real breakthrough began not in the field but in the library when a new generation of researchers asked a different kind of question. Instead of looking only for kings and battles, they began to look for markets and merchants. This shift from political to economic history was profound. Pioneering scholars like the French Assyriologist François Thoreau-Danguin in the late 19th century started publishing meticulous copies of these so-called administrative texts, treating them with the same respect as royal inscriptions. They realized that to understand a civilization, you must understand how its people fed themselves, traded goods, and managed their households. Another key figure was the Russian-born economist and historian Michael Rostovtsev in the early 20th century, who argued passionately that the ancient economy was not primitive but complex and worthy of serious study. He saw in these records the vibrant life of a society, not just the dry bones of its bureaucracy. This change in perspective turned a pile of broken clay into a priceless archive. The task was monumental, a form of intellectual archaeology. These tablets were often fragmented, scattered across different museum collections on different continents. A single business archive like that of the Egibi family might be broken into pieces, with one fragment in the British Museum, another in the Louvre, and a third in Istanbul. Scholars had to become detectives, matching handwriting styles, family names, and transaction dates across thousands of documents. They painstakingly compared the seal impressions, the unique signatures of individuals, to reconnect dispersed records. Slowly, fragment by fragment, they began to reconstruct entire business histories. A ledger fragment noting a loan of silver might be matched years later with another fragment recording the repayment of that very loan, completing a financial story separated by a century and an ocean. This correlation work revealed patterns invisible on any single tablet. By compiling hundreds of loan contracts, they could calculate the standard interest rates. By tracking property transfers, they could map the rise and fall of family fortunes across generations. The process was slow, often thankless, and required a rare blend of linguistic skill, economic intuition, and sheer patience. But through this decades-long effort, the static lists of commodities transformed into a dynamic portrait of a living economy. We owe our understanding of this first financial revolution not to a single dramatic find, but to the cumulative, careful work of countless historians who listened to the numbers and heard the echo of an ancient marketplace coming back to life. Deciphering the Babylonian ledgers meant learning a financial language that had been silent for millennia. This was far more than a simple translation of words. It was a translation of an entire economic mindset. The scribes used specialized terms that have no direct, clean equivalent in any modern language, forcing historians to become conceptual detectives. They had to piece together the meaning of a term not from a dictionary, but from the context of hundreds of real-world transactions, slowly building a definition from how the word was actually used in the marketplace. Two terms in particular reveal the unique texture of Babylonian financial thought, concepts that defy easy labeling but were absolutely central to how they did business. The first is the word hubertatu. At first glance, it appears in ledgers connected to loans, often as an additional charge. Early translators might have simplistically called it a type of interest. But that interpretation is an anachronism, projecting our modern, monolithic idea of interest onto a more nuanced system. By analyzing countless contracts, scholars realized hubertatu was not the core interest on a loan. Instead, it was a separate fee, often a one-time charge assessed at the beginning of a transaction. Think of it not as the rent on the money, but as the administrative or service fee for setting up the loan itself. It could be a fixed amount of silver or a small percentage of the principal, paid upfront to the lender or the scribe who drafted the contract. This distinction is crucial. It shows the Babylonians breaking down the cost of credit into separate components, a sophisticated approach to pricing financial services. Recognizing hubotatu as a fee, not interest, changes how we calculate the true cost of a Babylonian loan and reveals a business culture attentive to the granular details of a deal. The second, even more profound term is nishu. This word translates literally as something lifted or raised, but its financial meaning is something sworn or pledged. A contract that included nishu was not merely a commercial agreement, it was a solemn oath, often sworn in the name of the king or the gods. This transformed the document. It moved the obligation from the realm of civil law into the realm of divine law. Breaking such a sworn agreement was not just a breach of contract, it was an act of impiety, inviting supernatural consequences. This practice reveals the deep interconnection between finance, law, and religion. The highest level of trust in a business deal was guaranteed not just by the threat of a court, but by the fear of divine retribution. A loan secured by nishu carried a different weight, a different gravity in the minds of the people involved. To call it merely a contract is to miss its spiritual and social resonance. Understanding these terms saves us from a flat, modern reading of the past. If we see hubotatu as just interest, we miss their nuanced accounting. If we see nishu as just a signature, we miss the profound cultural forces that undergirded their trust. These words are portals into a different way of thinking about value, promise, and obligation. They remind us that economics is never just numbers on a page or clay. It is a cultural artifact built from the ideas, fears, and beliefs of the people who created it. To truly hear the conversation in these ancient ledgers, we must learn to speak their financial language in all its strange and specific beauty. One tablet from the city of Sippar, dated to the 6th year of King Nebuchadnezzar II, tells a complete story. It reads, Ner-Shamash, son of Bel-Ushazib, owes Idin-Marduk, son of Akisha, 2 minas of refined silver. The interest is 1 shekel per mina per month. He will repay the silver and its interest at the time of the date harvest. His orchard, bordering the property of Shamash Shumu Lishir and the canal, stands as pledge. Witnessed by 6 men whose names follow and sealed with the seal of Ner-Shamash. Let us walk through this line by line, for in these few clauses lies the entire Babylonian financial world. The first line establishes the parties. Ner-Shamash is the debtor, identified by his own name and his father's, a crucial method for distinguishing individuals in a society without our modern identification systems. Idin-Marduk is the creditor. The use of full patronymics makes this a legally precise document, not a casual note between friends. Next comes the principal, 2 minas of silver. A mina was 60 shekels, so this is 120 shekels total, a substantial sum, enough to purchase several houses. This is not a trivial loan for daily bread. This is capital for a significant venture, or perhaps to settle a larger debt. The interest clause is where the calculation becomes active. 1 shekel per mina per month is the standard Babylonian phrasing for a 20% annual rate. Since a mina is 60 shekels, 1 shekel of interest per mina is 1/60th, or about 1.67% per month, compounded over 12 months. That yields roughly 20% for the year. This rate is not arbitrary. It is the codified standard from Hammurabi's laws, showing this transaction operates firmly within the established legal framework. The repayment term is elegantly tied to the agricultural cycle. The silver and its interest will be repaid at the time of the date harvest. This is not a random calendar date, it is a moment of known liquidity. The borrower, likely a farmer or orchard owner, is scheduling his debt to come due precisely when his primary asset, the dates from his trees, is converted into sellable currency. It aligns the obligation with his cash flow, a thoughtful and practical structuring of the debt. Then we reach the heart of the security, the collateral clause. His orchard, carefully defined by its borders with a neighbor's plot and a canal, stands as pledge. This description is a legal property identifier, making the specific plot unambiguous and preventing fraud or confusion. By pledging the orchard itself, Ner-Shamash is securing the loan with his most valuable productive asset. If he repays, the pledge is void and the orchard remains his. If he defaults, the creditor Aiden-Marduk gains legal title to that land, a transfer of ownership proven by his possession of this very tablet. The orchard is not just security, it is the reason for the loan's existence, its future harvest meant to generate the silver for repayment. Finally, the social and legal enforcement mechanism, the witnesses. 6 men of the community observed this transaction. Their presence was not a formality, it was a public recording of the obligation, creating a network of people who could testify to the terms if memory ever faded or turned contentious. The personal seal of Ner-Shamash, pressed into the clay, is his binding signature, a unique mark that authenticates his consent. This single, ordinary tablet is therefore a loan agreement, a property deed, a legal filing, and a public record, all fused into one durable piece of clay. It transforms an abstract promise into a concrete, enforceable fact, allowing 2 individuals to cooperate across time, backed by the full weight of their society's commitment to the sanctity of the written word. These financial agreements were not abstract creations, they were woven directly into the land itself, the entire Babylonian economy, and therefore its sophisticated system of credit, rested upon the rhythmic pulse of 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The predictable, life-giving floods of these waterways set the tempo for civilization, and the financial instruments had to dance to that same ancient beat. The most common loan terms were not set by arbitrary dates on a calendar, but by the agricultural milestones everyone understood: the barley harvest in the spring and the date harvest in the late summer. A contract would not say repay in 6 months, it would explicitly state repay at the barley harvest or when the dates are brought in. This was not poetic language, it was precise financial scheduling. It aligned the moment of debt repayment with the moment when the borrower was most liquid, when his crops had been gathered and could be sold for the silver needed to settle his account. The financial year was a harvest year. This deep connection meant that a failed flood or a swarm of locusts was not just an agricultural disaster, it was a systemic financial crisis. When the harvest failed, an entire network of interlinked promises, all timed to that moment of plenty, would tremble and threaten to collapse. The financial system was therefore a direct mirror of the ecological one, its health utterly dependent on the generosity of the rivers and the sun. This symbiosis is perfectly illustrated by the most vital loan of all, the seed grain advance. Before the first furrow was even dug in the spring, a farmer faced a fundamental problem. To plant a crop, he needed to set aside a significant portion of his previous harvest as seed. But if the last year had been lean, or if he was just starting out, he had no seed to plant. Without intervention, the cycle of production would stop before it began. This is where the temple or a private financier stepped in with a specific, purpose-built financial instrument. The lender would advance the farmer the necessary barley or other seed grain, not as a gift but as a loan. The contract stipulated that the loan, plus a substantial interest premium, often that standard 1/3, would be repaid from the very harvest that seed would produce. The farmer was essentially borrowing future food to create more future food, with the lender taking a share of the resulting bounty. This was finance as a catalyst for life. It unlocked productive capacity that would otherwise lie dormant. The ledger entry for a seed loan was a bet on the fertility of the earth and the labor of the farmer, a risk taken months before any return was visible. These contracts reveal a profound understanding of capital, not as sterile wealth, but as a generative force that could set the natural world to work. The silver standard might have been the unit of account, but the real currency that fueled the heartland of Babylon was the promise of the next harvest, a promise secured by seed, soil, and river water. The design of loans around these natural cycles created a financial landscape of remarkable predictability. Because everyone knew when the harvests occurred, credit could flow in safe, seasonal waves. The period just after a harvest was a time of settling debts, paying rents, and accumulating silver reserves. The period before planting was a time of seeking loans, purchasing seed, and making investments. This rhythmic ebb and flow of capital gave the economy a stable cadence. It also meant that the value of collateral, like a pledged orchard, was intrinsically tied to its annual yield. A creditor accepting a date palm grove as security was not just thinking about the land. He was calculating the future stream of date harvests it would produce, which could service the interest or even repay the principal. The environment did not just dictate timing, it dictated value. This intimate bond between finance and ecology made the system both beautifully adapted and terrifyingly fragile. A single climatic shock could unravel the careful logic of 1,000 clay tablets. Yet, it also fostered resilience. The community understood that financial survival was tied to agricultural survival, which may have encouraged cooperative behaviors like the sharing of irrigation labor or the communal management of flood canals that supported the entire economic edifice. The rivers wrote the terms, and the scribes merely translated them into cuneiform, creating a financial language spoken in the dialect of sun, water, and grain. The permanence of clay gave Babylonian families a powerful tool for shaping the future, a way to reach beyond a single lifetime. For a society built on capital, the most critical transaction was not a loan or a sale, but the careful, deliberate act of passing everything on to the next generation. The ledgers show us this process in exquisite, legally binding detail, revealing how financial dynasties were engineered through inheritance. When the head of a household, like a successful merchant or landowner, passed away, his estate did not simply dissolve or get claimed by the state. Instead, it was meticulously divided according to his will or customary law, and every single item, every asset, and every lingering debt was recorded on a formal inheritance tablet. These documents are masterpieces of economic planning. A typical division record might list the deceased father's holdings, a house in the city's second district, a 12-gur plot of date palms by the canal, 3 enslaved individuals named, and an outstanding loan portfolio of 50 shekels of silver owed to him by various neighbors. The tablet then precisely allocates these pieces. The eldest son might receive the family house and the responsibility for the primary family religious duties. The second son could be granted the date palm orchard and the right to collect the interest from half of the outstanding loans. A third son might inherit the remaining loan portfolio and the enslaved workers to help manage the collections. This was not an equal split of a pile of silver. It was a strategic division of an operating financial entity. Each son received a functional piece of the family business, a mix of productive assets and income streams designed to allow him to continue and grow his share. Crucially, the inheritance tablets also transferred obligations. If the father had an unpaid debt to the temple, that liability was formally assigned to one of the heirs, who now bore the responsibility for its repayment. This legal continuity was everything. It meant a creditor's claim did not die with the debtor, it lived on, attached to the inherited assets. This transformed family wealth from a personal fortune into a kind of corporate entity that could survive its founders. The system prioritized lineage and stability above all else. By legally binding sons to both the assets and the debts of their father, it created powerful incentives for each generation to steward and expand what they received. A son who squandered his inherited orchard would not only ruin himself, he would break a chain of capital that stretched back to his grandfather, damaging the family's reputation and creditworthiness for decades. This intergenerational glue is what allowed families like the Egibi to operate for over a century. Their vast archive includes multiple inheritance tablets, each one a snapshot of the family's financial empire being carefully reconfigured for a new era, ensuring the machinery of credit and investment never stopped humming. In these divisions, we see the birth of a profound idea that capital is not meant to be consumed but to be nurtured and passed forward, a legacy written in clay that could outlive empires. Yet for all its sophistication, this system had distinct boundaries, clear limits that define the edges of their financial world. The Babylonians built an astonishing engine of credit, but they did not invent every part of the modern financial machine. Understanding what they lacked is just as important as celebrating what they created, for it shows us the specific shape of their innovation. First and foremost, there was no central bank. No single institution controlled the money supply or acted as a lender of last resort to stabilize the entire economy during a crisis. While the temple of a major city like Babylon might have functioned as a de facto central bank for its own region, issuing loans and storing wealth, there was no nationwide regulatory body setting monetary policy for the entire empire. Financial stability depended on the health of individual temples and the occasional royal decree of debt cancellation, a powerful but blunt instrument. This meant systemic risk was managed reactively through social and political interventions rather than through a dedicated, preemptive financial authority. The system was resilient, but its stability was woven from many independent threads, not anchored by a single, unbreakable pillar. Another conspicuous absence was paper money, or any form of circulating currency beyond weighed silver. While their silver standard was a brilliant abstraction, the medium itself remained physical, heavy, and subject to the hassles of purity testing and careful weighing for every significant transaction. You could not fold a shekel of silver into your pocket or easily send it across a continent with a written note. The closest they came to dematerialized money was through ledger transfers within a temple or merchant house, where a scribe could move value from one account to another without moving metal. This was a crucial innovation, but it was a private, localized form of credit money, not a public, universally accepted piece of paper that everyone could hand from person to person. The concept of a state-issued, lightweight currency that represented a guaranteed value was a revolution that would come much later, with the first coins in Lydia and eventually with paper money in China. The Babylonian system was built on substance, not symbol. Their world of investment was also fundamentally different from our own. While they had sophisticated partnership agreements for trade ventures, these were temporary arrangements between specific individuals, dissolving once the caravan returned and the profits were split. There was no widespread equity investment in the form of permanent joint stock companies, where shares could be freely bought and sold on an open market by anonymous investors. You could not purchase a small piece of the Egibi family's entire business empire. Investment was personal, based on known reputations and direct relationships. You backed a specific merchant you trusted for a specific journey. You did not buy a share in an abstract corporate entity designed to exist in perpetuity. This kept capital formation tightly bound to networks of kinship and personal trust, limiting the scale at which truly impersonal, large-scale capital could be assembled. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, credit in Babylon was a personal or institutional bond, not an impersonal, tradable commodity. A loan contract was a unique legal document tying two specific parties together. While there is evidence that debt obligations could be transferred or sold to a third party, this was not a fluid, active market like the bond markets of today. You could not easily bundle thousands of mortgages into a security to be traded on an exchange. Credit risk was not standardized, securitized, or spread across a vast pool of anonymous investors. It was borne directly by the lender or a small circle of associates. This made the system intensely relational. Your ability to get a loan depended heavily on your personal standing, your family's reputation, and your tangible collateral. This provided a strong incentive for honesty and community cohesion, but it also meant that credit was not easily available to outsiders or those without established social capital. The system was brilliant at managing known risks within a closed network, but it was not designed to anonymize risk and distribute it across a global marketplace. These boundaries are not failures, they are definitions. They show us the precise contours of the Babylonian achievement. They built a comprehensive system for creating trust and enabling commerce within the technological and social limits of their time. They mastered the art of the promise, but the promise remained anchored in specific people, specific places, and specific pieces of clay. Their legacy is not that they finished the financial revolution, but that they started it, providing the foundational vocabulary upon which all later innovations, from central banks to stock exchanges, would eventually build. This evidence does not merely add a footnote to the story of money. It rewrites the first chapter entirely. For generations, the grand narrative of economic progress has been a distinctly European tale. We have been taught that the sophisticated machinery of modern finance, from banking to bonds, was a product of the Italian Renaissance, a sudden flowering of genius in the city-states of Florence and Venice. The Babylonian ledgers shatter that timeline. They prove that the most fundamental ideas of finance are not 500 years old, but over 4,000 years old. This is not about finding a few early loans. It is about discovering a complete, operational system that mirrors our own in its logical architecture. The concept of credit as a formalized promise, the practice of charging interest as the price of time, the use of collateral to manage risk, the reliance on written, witnessed contracts as the ultimate legal authority, even the recognition of economic cycles that required deliberate intervention through debt relief, all of these were not European inventions. They were Babylonian innovations, meticulously recorded in Cuneiform while the pyramids of Giza were still new. This shifts the origin point of global capitalism by millennia, and relocates it geographically from the Mediterranean to the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The implications are profound. It means that the drive to quantify trust, to negotiate with the future, and to build systems around abstract value is not a cultural artifact of the West. It is a human impulse emerging independently in one of the world's first great civilizations, whenever the conditions of stability, agriculture, and record-keeping allowed it to flourish. The Renaissance Italians were not inventors, they were brilliant rediscoverers and refiners, connecting to a deep, ancient current of economic thought that had been buried in the desert. Recognizing this changes how we see ourselves. It suggests that the logic of markets and finance is not a modern overlay on human nature, but may be intertwined with the very development of complex society itself. When we look at a modern mortgage or a corporate bond, we are not looking at something new. We are looking at the latest iteration of a 4,000-year-old conversation about how to build tomorrow with the resources of today. This reframes economic history from a story of European exceptionalism to a story of human ingenuity, with roots that reach deep into the common soil of our shared past. The echoes of those ancient contracts are not distant whispers, they are the steady background hum of our own financial world. Look at a modern mortgage agreement or a corporate bond prospectus, and you will see the same fundamental architecture, refined but not reinvented. Both documents begin by naming the parties, the creditor and the debtor. They specify the principal amount, now in digital dollars instead of silver shekels. They define the interest rate, still the price of using someone else's resources over time. They lay out a repayment schedule, a timeline for the future. And they detail the collateral, whether it is a house, a factory, or a stream of future revenue that secures the promise. The legal language has grown more complex, but the core transaction is identical, a formalized agreement to exchange value now for more value later, secured by trust and the force of law. This is not a coincidence, it is a testament to a problem solved 4,000 years ago, a solution so effective we have been building upon it ever since. We also see the same enduring tension, a constant push and pull between the power of credit and the vulnerability of debt. In Babylon, a poor harvest could push a farming family into servitude, concentrating wealth and creating social strain. Today, a medical emergency or a sudden job loss can trap a household in a cycle of high-interest debt, with similar consequences for economic mobility and social stability. The names and mechanisms have changed, but the fundamental dynamic between those who lend and those who borrow, between opportunity and overextension, remains a central drama of economic life. Both societies recognize that this tension, if left unchecked, could unravel the social fabric. The Babylonian response was the royal debt amnesty, a clean slate decreed from the palace. Our modern equivalents are more varied, from bankruptcy protection laws that offer individuals a fresh start, to complex government interventions during widespread financial crises aimed at preventing systemic collapse. The tools are different, but the underlying principle is the same, that a functioning economy requires mechanisms to periodically release unsustainable financial pressure, to reset the balance between the ledger and the lives it represents. Most profoundly, the Babylonians established the critical idea that a vibrant market must operate within a framework of law. Hammurabi's code did not just cap interest rates, it provided a predictable set of rules for commerce. It stated that if a builder's house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder would be held responsible. This created accountability. It meant that when two merchants entered a partnership, they did so with a shared understanding of their rights and obligations, backed by the authority of the state. This legal scaffolding is what allowed trust to extend beyond family and immediate community. It is the exact same principle that underpins our modern regulatory bodies, securities laws, and international trade agreements. We no longer invoke the gods Shamash and Marduk as witnesses on our contracts, but we do invoke the power of courts and regulatory agencies to enforce them. The goal is identical: to create a space where strangers can do business with confidence, knowing that promises, when properly recorded, have weight. This reveals finance not as a wild force of nature, but as a human invention, a garden that requires careful tending, weeding, and occasional deliberate pruning to bear fruit for the whole community. The patterns are not just similar, they are continuous, a conversation about value, risk, and time that began in clay and now flows through fiber optic cables, proving that the most enduring challenges of economics are, at their heart, deeply human ones. The story of these financial ledgers is far from finished. While we have pieced together a remarkable narrative from the tablets already translated, this is not a closed book resting on a library shelf. It is an active, ongoing archaeological dig, both in the field and in the digital realm. In Iraq, at sites like ancient Sippar and Babylon itself, teams continue to carefully excavate new layers of history. Each season's work has the potential to uncover another archive room, another cache of contracts that could shift our understanding of a specific practice or reveal an entirely unknown merchant family. The physical act of discovery, brushing dust from a clay rectangle inscribed with neat columns of numbers, remains a direct link to that ancient world of commerce. Yet some of the most exciting breakthroughs are now happening not under the desert sun, but in the quiet glow of computer screens in universities around the world. The challenge is one of overwhelming volume. Museums hold hundreds of thousands of these tablets, many still sitting in storage boxes, unpublished and unread. A single scholar might spend a lifetime translating only a few thousand, To accelerate this process, researchers are turning to advanced digital tools. High-resolution, three-dimensional scanning technology is being used to create perfect virtual copies of fragile tablets. These digital models can be rotated, lit from any angle, and have their surfaces enhanced to reveal faded or damaged cuneiform signs that are invisible to the naked eye. More importantly, these scans are being fed into growing international databases where artificial intelligence algorithms are being trained to recognize and suggest translations for common signs and phrases. This does not replace the human expert, but it acts as a powerful assistant, helping scholars sort, catalog, and cross-reference tablets at a scale never before possible. Imagine a digital detective that can instantly find every contract from a certain year that mentions a type of loan called hubotatu, or trace the appearance of a specific merchant's seal across 100 different documents in collections from London to Chicago. This computational archaeology is opening doors to patterns we could never see by studying one tablet at a time. Every newly translated ledger adds another piece to the mosaic, refining a date, clarifying a business relationship, or revealing an exception to a rule we thought was absolute. The work is slow and meticulous, but it promises a future where we might have a nearly complete map of the Babylonian economic network, understanding not just how one family operated, but how the entire system pulsed and flowed. For now, the mystery endures. In museum basements across the globe, in unopened crates and forgotten drawers, countless clay ledgers still wait silently for their stories to be told, holding the untold financial secrets of a civilization that first taught the world how to build tomorrow on a promise. So we arrive at the end of our journey, not with a simple answer, but with a transformed landscape. What began as a collection of forgotten clay fragments in museum basements has been reassembled, piece by scholarly piece, into a complete financial world. This was not a primitive barter economy, but a sophisticated network of credit, risk, and law that operated with a familiar, almost startling logic. The ledgers of Babylon reveal that the essence of banking, the very DNA of complex finance, did not emerge in Renaissance Italy. It was born in the ancient Near East over 4,000 years ago, providing the foundational grammar for the global systems that would follow. The contracts we use today, the concepts of interest and collateral, the very idea of a binding written promise, all find their first clear expression pressed into damp Mesopotamian clay. This recovery is more than an academic footnote. It is the restoration of a lost chapter of human ingenuity. It reminds us that our drive to quantify trust, to negotiate with the future, and to build structures of abstract value is not a modern invention. It is a profound and ancient human impulse, emerging wherever civilization provided the stability and tools to record its ambitions. The story of these tablets challenges a narrow view of progress, placing the origins of our economic reality in a much deeper and more diverse past. As you consider this, perhaps it prompts a larger question. If something as fundamental as global banking has roots this old and this overlooked, what other pillars of our modern world might have equally ancient, forgotten origins waiting to be rediscovered? The past is never truly silent. It simply waits for us to learn how to listen. For more journeys into the hidden connections of history, be sure to engage with the channel and explore the other mysteries we have uncovered.